We are now going to switch to a short video which will introduce the panel discussion. It comes from Queensland Health and it talks a little bit about the work that they've been doing in that space to implement the Charter. We'll play that video now and then I'll introduce the panel and we'll get going on the Q&A from there.
عينيتي
مينغلابا سلام
مرحبا بكم
سلام كما وعلكم
أهلا وسهلا turabaramukije mwesi muri aka kanya.
In 2016, the Queensland Government established the Queensland Multicultural Recognition Act to acknowledge and recognise the incredibly valuable contribution of the many diverse people that make up Queensland's community. To bring the Act to life, the Multicultural Queensland Charter was established. The Charter recognises and pays respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, the First Nations people. The Charter itself comprises 8 principles that guide us in how we create an inclusive and more unified and cohesive Queensland.
What the Charter does and the Recognition Act is it allows agencies to shape what they're doing to fit in with the society that we now are and the society we want to be in the future.
The Multicultural Queensland Charter to me is all about raising awareness on our cultural diversity within the states. And it also reflects how we can deliver a better service to a different diverse community, whether in Queensland Health or whether in different departments. And also it allowed us to, challenge our narrative and think how we can better deliver service to all those people for the benefit and the interest of how diverse Queensland is and to the diverse community.
As a manager of a specialist service that specifically works with the multicultural population in Queensland, I see the Charter as a very important development for us. Having worked in this space for quite a few years, I can really feel a change that there's a lot more understanding and awareness about the need to be more inclusive in our public policy and planning.
The values of the Charter obviously align very closely with the values of our service and underpin our work with clients from a culturally and linguistically diverse background. So when we write best practice guidelines, we base them on the evidence, but then we take that to our community consultants and they advise us about how we can put that into practice, those guidelines into practice in a way that works well for community.
The Queensland Multicultural Charter has been very useful to inform the education development that we have. So when we do sessions, particularly with clinicians on inclusion and access and equity in health, we'll show a copy of the Charter at the start of the session and then we'll talk through it with clinicians so they understand their responsibilities.
It's very important to foster an inclusive and diverse workforce. In Queensland Health particularly, we have the great opportunity to be able to do that. We have a lot of experience and a lot of different thought, and we have lots of opportunity then to include that thought and thinking into the way in which we respond to the challenges that Queensland Health faces.
We all have a responsibility to bring the 8 principles of the Multicultural Queensland Charter to life, to achieve an inclusive, harmonious and united Queensland, regardless of our position or where we work within Queensland Health. What this means for everyone at Queensland Health is that we consult, plan and develop policies and programs that deliver safe, accessible, timely and culturally appropriate services and facilities to all Queenslanders. It means respecting, valuing and embracing the diverse cultural backgrounds, experiences and contributions of our work colleagues and agency partners. By bringing the principles of the Charter to life, we are creating healthy, connected and inclusive communities where Queenslanders will be among the healthiest people in the world.
What a wonderful introduction to the panel discussion, and we will have Kathleen Forrester, who's the Deputy Director General for Policy Planning and the Policy and Planning Division of Queensland Health to expand on some of that work. I might actually ask the panel to come forward now. Commissioner Tan, if you'd like to join us, I won't reintroduce you if that's okay. I think people have got a sense of who you are. But I might start with Kathleen, given that we've just seen that video. So to let you know that, Kathleen, if you'd like to join us at the, take a seat and join us on the podium. Kathleen is the Deputy Director General of Strategy, Policy and Planning, as I mentioned, and she has responsibility for the development of strategic health policy, infrastructure systems and workforce planning, future funding strategies, intergovernment relations and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. Just a couple of things in your portfolio. You've also held senior positions in the private sector, consulting on social policy reform, and your career spans both state and federal level and senior roles both internal and external to government. So please welcome Kathleen to the panel. A person very familiar with many in the room is Commissioner Ian Stewart, the Commissioner of Police for the Queensland Police Service. Commissioner, would you like to join us on the podium? Commissioner Stewart is the 19th Commissioner of the Queensland Police Service and is a career police officer with over 40 years of service. About to come to a close later this year, but you've been pivotal in the strategic leadership of the QPS through security arrangements, including for the G20 Leaders Summit, associated finance ministers and central bank governors meeting in 2014, and recently the 2018 Commonwealth Games. You've done a heck of a lot in the multicultural space, and I know that you will talk to that as well. But I also know that you're married to Carol and have 3 fantastic adult children who are going to spend a little bit more time with you in the coming years. So first off, congratulations on your pending retirement from the police at least, and we look forward to where you land in your next role.
It's always a sting.
Lastly, Sara Parrott, and certainly not leastly, Sara is the Head of Corporate Responsibility at Suncorp. So please welcome Sara to the podium. This is a new corporate responsibility function for Suncorp, and Sara is responsible for leading the development of sustainability and corporate responsibility strategy group wide. Sorry, not necessarily worldwide, but I'm sure that's in the plans. Previously, Sara worked for resources giant Xstrata, the global investment firm Babcock & Brown, and the accounting firm Ernst & Young. In those companies, she was leading sustainability policy, social impact management, stakeholder engagement, and community investment at regional, national, and global levels. She's also held executive and management roles in the community sector in various positions in social enterprises and including the largest one in the childcare provider, Good Start Early Learning, and also with TIA Australia and the Uniting Church. She's the Director of Climate KIC Australia. I'm not sure what KIC stands for, Sara, but that's what you are the Director of. You're also a National Steering Group member for the LBG Australia, New Zealand and Queensland, and you're co-chair of the Social Impact Measurement Network of Australia. So a very busy person. Suncorp is obviously pleased to have you, as are we in the community. So welcome, Sara, and welcome to the whole of the panel. So we now have until almost the end of the session for a Q&A session. I will remind you of the Twitter rule, 40 seconds or 40 words or less. 40 seconds would be great, but 40 words or less in terms of your questions. And if you could begin by naming who you are and if you represent an organisation, that would be useful too. We will take questions from the regions as well. The other thing I would ask you to do is could you raise your hand if you have a question. I'll try to take questions from around the room and across the state. But please wait for the microphone to come to you because we'd love to hear what you've got to say. I have the privilege of asking the very first couple of questions, and I guess I've introduced you now, and we have a sense at least of what Queensland Health is doing in this space. So I might just start there with Kathleen. And Kathleen, I'm just wondering about you know, I guess that video really did introduce what you were doing there. But can you start to unpack that a little bit? You know, for example, I'm aware that you've been capturing cultural diversity data, you've been doing cultural awareness training, you're providing interpreting services, a whole range of different things. Can you start to unpack that both at a systemic level and at a kind of unit level, I guess?
And so thanks, Peter. From my role here in Brisbane, I've got responsibility for strategy, planning and policy. And so it is quite high level. But one of the things that the Director General mentioned in the video is that our vision is that by 2026, Queenslanders will be amongst the healthiest people in the world. And that's something that I hope you hear when you're out and about and you're talking to people. That's something that is something that's quite simple to say, but will be quite the challenge to achieve. We are a pretty healthy population by and large. By world standards, we do very well, and our public health system is excellent, and we are very, very lucky to have access to that. But one of the things that we know about health outcomes right now, and one of the things that we need to do much better on if we are truly to achieve that goal by 2026, is to address the inequity in health outcomes. And so one of the things that we work on very hard is understanding where the issues are that we need to focus on to tackle that inequity. And so we know that our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population in Queensland really has health outcomes that we need to work differently around to achieve real change. And we know that our culturally and linguistically diverse communities as well are another group. So when we come to the challenge of meeting that vision and delivering on that vision, we're acutely aware of the need to address those inequities in health outcomes. So we start at the very highest level with our overarching vision, and immediately there's a link for us to understand how we can work differently and work better to achieve that vision. Now that sort of cascades all the way through. So I think you've mentioned translators and interpreters. So we work hard to make sure that when people need translators and interpreters, that they're available and accessible, and make sure that we've got the right policies and processes in place. We've got a particular focus on making sure that refugees who particularly need help to access services when they first arrive and then to connect with health services are able to do that. And we sort of have systems and policies and processes in place. And then as an organisation, we really try to support local initiatives that go on across the health system that spans from a tertiary hospital with a trauma centre on the Gold Coast right through to the tiny primary healthcare centres in the Torres Strait. And we try and support local initiatives that come from our frontline workers that are implemented in a range of ways. So that can be everything from making sure that if we've got newly arrived people coming into communities who aren't familiar with the public health system like we have it, who may never have experienced a hospital environment, never seen the inside of an ambulance. We've got programs that really help to familiarise people with all the elements of a health system so that they feel comfortable and confident to access it.
So can I just interrupt you there, Kathleen? Because that's a fantastic array of different initiatives.
It really is.
What we're acutely aware of, similar to every other health department in the world probably, huge organisation, huge competing priorities. You've been in the headlines the last couple of days. How do you hold these types of initiatives, particularly as they relate to the Charter, and keeping these initiatives very practical in the midst of enormous competing priorities?
So I think things like the Charter are really quite helpful, and the action plan is particularly helpful because as people who work in policy and in government know, what you measure matters, an old adage. And so we account for and report back against the Charter each year. That gives us the opportunity to have structured conversations about what we've done, about how that's gone, about what's working and what's maybe not working, and then to start to change it. So I guess that it sort of highlights again the importance of the Charter, the importance of the Act, to have those systemic pieces, those frameworks in place to help us keep a focus and to keep regularly being taken back to the aspiration and to test our achievements against the aspiration and to keep working on ways to improve that.
So if you can measure the work that you're doing in the space and report back on that keeps giving it currency.
It does, and one of the areas that we know that we do need to do more work on in Queensland Health, I was in a discussion about this just yesterday, is to do more work on our data so that we do have better data so that we can understand the service needs of our culturally and linguistically diverse communities better and start to respond in more granular detail on that. So we know that, but certainly it's, so it's not just data, we need to have conversations as well, because the data will tell us a certain amount, but you need to understand practically what's happening as well so that you can interpret that data. So I think that both are critically important. So we need the conversations as well as the evidence base.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Kathleen. Just on a different tack, I'm going to throw to Sara. Sara, I was fortunate enough to be at the launch of your partnership with MDA the other day, and I do declare people in the room know that I have an association with MDA, a close one. But I guess I'd be really interested to hear a little bit more about how that came about and what are the specifics of that, because as I understand it, and I know less about the specifics about it, but it's actually a different sort of partnership. It's not traditional in terms of it's not a one-way partnership. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit?
So Suncorp's really proud to have just launched a new partnership with Multicultural Development Australia, MDA, which Peter's the chair of, and they're the primary settlement agency in Queensland for newly arrived refugees. But the partnership, actually, the friendship between Suncorp and MDA started at the school gate. It was a conversation between a Suncorp a mum from school who was a Suncorp staff member who worked in HR, and a mum from school who was working at MDA in recruitment and placing refugees into jobs. And they were chatting and they said, well, we should work together, we should be doing some stuff. So they started a little pilot of trying to see if Suncorp could hire people from MDA, young people from all age groups from all over the world who were arriving as refugees. And that was a small little pilot program, but in the first year, Suncorp hired 9 people from MDA into, and what we call the experienced hires pathway, into real jobs in our call centres and in our organisation here in Brisbane. From that, we started talking to MDA about how we could work together, and Suncorp has a focus on financial inclusion, and that is really about not just financial literacy but also economic participation, so people being able to access real jobs and be part of our community from that perspective. So we actually started thinking, the Employment Pathways program is great, but we can't hire everybody. How are we going to do more? Like, how can we really leverage our strengths? And so we sat down and we talked about a whole bunch of things that we could do together, and it's the partnership with MDA is really not about us bringing our knowledge, it's about building the connections between Suncorp people and MDA people and the refugees that are arriving in Queensland. So one of the main things we're doing is a job readiness program, which actually means instead of just trying to hire people into Suncorp, we're actually working with a really broad range of people to get them ready for jobs, all sorts of different jobs. So we're going to be supporting about 200 people per annum through MDA in job readiness, and we're going to get our staff involved in that. So that could be things like fixing up their CV or having a practice recruitment interview. We're also going to be doing a career mentoring program. So there'll be 10 people from Suncorp who'll become career mentors and be matched up with refugees who've recently arrived or who've been here for a little while through MDA. And that's not, again, it's not about our knowledge, but it's about connections. And that won't just change 10 lives, like 10 lives of 10 refugees. It will change 20 lives, because that will change the lives and the attitudes and the way of thinking of the Suncorp people as well. But the partnership also has cultural capacity building and cultural immersion opportunities for our people. So MDA coming into our office and we're learning. And we also will have a financial literacy program. So one of the things we discovered when we talked to MDA is that the sort of formal settlement process doesn't actually have anything in about financial services in Australia. What is superannuation? Like, that would be a thing that, if no matter what kind of people are arriving, whether they have been in a refugee camp in Africa or they're from Syria, they might have been quite wealthy and quite well educated or have never had a bank account. But if you come to Australia and you're faced with this thing called superannuation, you'd have no clue what it's about. So what we're actually doing there is, together with MDA and another partner of ours, Wesley Mission, is we're taking the kind of vanilla financial literacy program that exists in Australia and making it flexible and designing it specifically for use with people who are going through the settlement process. So we're hoping to have like hundreds of people being able to access that. And then we have volunteering as well, so Suncorp people can get involved, and we are a major sponsor of Luminous, which is the lantern parade, which our people absolutely love. So we make lanterns, and that's an opportunity too for, we really want Suncorp people to bring their lives to work, bring their whole person to work and be everything that they are when they're at work. And that also lets our people bring their families and get their families involved in what we're doing. So it's very holistic and it's very two-way, and it leverages our special skills, but it also really helps change Suncorp's culture and our people's life and make their lives richer as well.
So I guess there were, again, a lot of practical suggestions there that other corporates could be inspired by and use as a model in terms of creating that shared value. I guess Suncorp is you're a bank, and you're involved in risk assessments all the time. What do you see as the big risks to this type of initiative moving forward, and how have you kind of foretold that risk, and what strategies do you have in place too?
I think one of the really big challenges and the risks for this kind of work is when times get tough inside an organisation, and it always happens. The kind of the cost cutting comes through. How do you help people inside a corporate find the time and the resources to dedicate to being engaged with the community and kind of getting out of the office instead of just talking to each other and doing business with each other, which we're really good at, and making sure we're out there? That's probably the biggest challenge. And I think by capturing people's hearts and minds, and by really making sure that the opportunities that we give Suncorp people make them so embedded and they care about it so much that they're not going to let it go. And I think one of the things with building culture inside an organisation is that there's that term about people have got capacity and they've got discretionary capacity. People will put in extra when they really care, and hopefully these type of programs is the extra that people put in, that no matter what happens with the ups and downs of budgets and headcount and that kind of thing, if we're really passionate and actually it's quite core to who we are, we will keep doing it.
Excellent. Thanks, Sara. Thanks. Commissioner Stewart, the Queensland Police undoubtedly have a huge legacy in terms of the work you've done in this space, and I know that you could talk at length about various initiatives you have, including the PLOs, for example, which are well established and embedded in the culture of the organisation now very firmly. As you approach your cessation of duties as a police officer, I'm just wondering if you could not just talk about what the police have done, and feel free to do so, but I'm really keen to know in terms of where you see the future, what are the next steps?
That's a great question, and one which I wish my colleagues all the very best for the future. And I'll stop there. No. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners, and I particularly want to do that today because it's Auntie Peggy's birthday, and I'd like to wish you happy birthday, Auntie Peggy. Absolutely. And she's saying no. She's 23, she tells me, and it's wonderful that she's come along here, though, to be part of this process on her birthday, so thank you. In a democratic society, and thank the Lord that we have a democratic society that we live in this country, and but in any democracy, to a stronger or lesser extent, policing is about confidence. Policing is about a consensual arrangement with the community, and simply put, it means that 90% of the community will do the right thing, not because there's a police agency or a police officer standing on a corner. They do it because they're good citizens. They understand that we all have laws and we live by those laws, and we certainly manage our society in that way for the benefit of everyone. And what's important about that statement is that that percentage of people who will act in that way for the common good is affected tremendously by the confidence that they and the faith that they have in their police department. So we have worked for many years to engage our community, to have those conversations right across the community, and not just to talk about it, but to actually prove to the community that we are your police department. And it's not your police department to the local Rotary Club or to members of another government agency. It's to every person, individual, group that exists within Queensland and within Australia. I often say, and any of you have heard me speak, is that whilst I always acknowledge the traditional owners and pay my respects, I also pay my respects to every culture that's represented in our country, because diversity has always been the strength of Australia. Inclusion is our strength, and it always will be. And on that note, one of the things I'm proudest about is that we have reached out really strongly to bring more people of different cultural backgrounds and different faiths into our community. And sometimes that's quite challenging, because particularly with new arrivals and new cultures coming into this great nation of ours, policing is not seen as either an honourable or even an honest career. It's not even seen as valued, because often the police in those cultures, countries, represent the government oppression. Some of the worst atrocities are committed by policing agencies on behalf of governments in some cultures. Now, we know that. So you can see the challenge that we often have when we're reaching out to the entire cultural milieu of Australia and try and encourage them to partner with us, to have confidence in us, that we will treat them fairly and honestly, and we will treat them with respect. And that can be a really challenging thing. Now, it's easy for me to sit here as your commissioner and say those things, but where the rubber hits the road, that's where it has to actually take place. So we work really, really hard right through the organisation to encourage that, and one of the ways we do that is through our culturally and linguistically diverse recruiting program, where we encourage people from different cultural backgrounds, different faith backgrounds, to come and work with us to prepare them for recruit training. So this is a pre-recruit course. And what we do in that course is help them understand our laws, help them understand the values and principles that underpin all of Australian society, and ready them for working through the very rigorous training program we put all recruits through. So I'll probably stop there, Peter, because I know people will have questions. Sure. I think it's so important that issue of universal respect is something that we put at the forefront of everything we do.
Ian, can I ask, in terms of assisting the people that are aspiring to apply for your position, what's the big opportunity? So I didn't look over there deliberately. What's the big opportunity in this space in terms of implementing the Charter? What's the big opportunity for the next Commissioner?
Look, I would hope that the next Commissioner will take this to another level. I truly believe that it's important that we reflect as an organisation the society we serve. And that's happening in a way. Many of you know that we even have a 50-50 gender inclusion process for our recruit courses, which is another issue in terms of inclusion. But if you just did that alone, it's going to take you about 30 years to get to anywhere like the proper representation of women within our organisation.
So scalability is the big
Exactly.
opportunity.
It just takes time. It takes time to move through the levels of the organisation because of the way that we are structured as an organisation. I would hope that the next Commissioner will continue to do many of the good things that we do in our outreach programs, our CAL programs, our respect across the entire community. But I would hope that they would be courageous enough to go to that further stage and start to bring in perhaps some lateral entry to get people into those higher levels, because it's a real, for my mind, that's a demonstration of how important this is to us, that we really need to operate in perhaps a different way, not just do the mundane, but do the extraordinary in ensuring that we mirror our society.
Thanks, Ian. I have one more question, which I'll direct to Commissioner Tan, and then I'll open it up to the floor. Commissioner Tan?
No, I'm not applying for the job.
I'll take you back to when you started in your job, and you echoed it today when you talked about the bridges that need to be built. Yeah. You talked about the role of the Commission in bringing the community together, or words to that effect. And I'm just wondering, what's happened in Christchurch and the impact that it's had on Queensland and the understandable grief that the country has been experiencing. There has been outpourings of solidarity and compassion that have occurred over the last couple of weeks. But my projection, my forecast, and I'd like to hear your views of whether this is an accurate forecast, but my forecast is that the next few weeks might be more challenging, that we might see a strengthening of the debate about freedom of speech versus cultural diversity and multiculturalism. So my question to you is, how do we ensure that the instruments like the Charter, your role, your commission, our local Queensland Commission, how do we ensure that they serve to build bridges? Because there is a critique that these instruments and these legislation and these institutions actually create divisions. How do we address that? Because I think we're going to be in these conversations over the next few weeks.
Well, a couple of things. One, obviously, the fact that you have a charter like this denotes the framework of which you're having a discussion on. So you're saying this is the frame. The pictures will be painted inside. And so you set the parameters of what's acceptable discussion. This is the value statement. So that's what you've done. All right. And so the next part is always to ensure that you contain that within the parameter of saying, I know you talk about a whole range of things. I understand all of that. But it must be in the confine of the things we find form the ground rules of the discussion about where it's going to be productive. I go on a jaunt about talking about the whole range of things that are even more divisive. But the fact is, the framework was provided and created for a purpose. It was to be inclusive. So anyone who argues differently, well, obviously they're entitled to have a view about this. But the whole design of what you've got here in Queensland or anywhere else was designed for a more specific purpose of including communities. And the other thing that I want to add, and that's been spoken to by my communities, and I thought it was important, I didn't touch on that, was this. In terms of the work you do, be creative. I know in government sometimes it's hard to be creative because it's meant to be predictable, and I did my degree in politics about bureaucracy, so I know about predictability, stability. And you do have that, and you need that for governments to run. And all these programs you do, and all the blueprints and measurements, great to have, you need that, and I will support all of that. You need to drive all of that. But when you do that, you need to look at this and say, we got this. Is there anything outside the box? And you must do that all the time, because our preconceived idea of what works may not work out there. And our limitations are about what we think works. And I'll give you an example very quickly, because they're important to me. Governments were trying to deal with new migrants coming through, particularly from those who are refugees background. Family is terribly important, leadership. The old leader, the senior person in the community, and they guide them in their own communities where they come from. But the old man, and invariably he's a man, unfortunately, will come, and then the old man has no language capacity. He's a farmer, their village hate. He comes here, he's nobody. Kids don't listen. What's my old man tell me? Be a good kid and all that. They lost all currency. Right? And we haven't supported that. So that's trying to look for a job. They work in the abattoir, cleaning guts of animals. That's nothing wrong with that. But that's what they do. And they come back supposed to lead the community. I would say I'd rather spend the money, we'll identify the leaders, this is my view, and pick them out, give them a job, a tie, and work in the office and build them up. And they go back to the community, they got more time to lead the community. Is that helpful? I think it does. But we don't do that. We say, oh, look, this is Australia, get on, get a job, and we'll do the best we can for you. But these are about getting to a position where we're actually supporting communities. And the other thing, of course, is where we don't do a great job is supporting families, particularly with the migrant family coming from Asia and Africa. Family, and even the indigenous community, family is very important. That's where the money and the time has to go into it, supporting that. We don't do enough of that. So for me, consistently, is that do all the great job we do, build on it, build on this wonderful drivers and your KPIs and all. You need that, and you need all of that. But also look outside and say, does that work, and how do we make it work better? And one of the things that I'm hearing now is going to communities, even Muslim communities, and community level Muslim women's group in Sydney and all that would tell me that we're very fearful of what's happening out there, even in our homes, right? The difficulty, of course, is that we're not listening to them enough because we go to the proper channel. It goes through a service provider. It does that. And they're telling me, that's great, and we need to do that because they're all KPIs about how they all range out and money goes to $2 million and it comes back with 14 people getting jobs, great stuff. But they're saying, we're missing out because it's done and driven at a different capacity. We're the ones who know better, but we don't KPI as well. So we're missing out. And you find it in some of your areas as well. This is a message, and the question is, how do we marry that in into the whole process, that the community is driving it? And we have said before, the Aboriginal community, it works best when they're running it with the support coming up from communities and from the kind of operations we've got. So these are the things that, decision makers sit down, they need to do that and say, who is doing it best? They do. I know they don't do a good job giving it paperwork. In fact, they do a terrible job in giving paperwork, but it works in that area, and that's far more important than giving me the KPIs of saying it happens. But how do we marry the two of them together to make that work? And that for me is like always get away from preconceived ideas. These are the measurements. How do you know these measurements are the right measurements? Because there are different measurements out there, and some measurements don't even count in our parameters, in our radar, because it doesn't measure that. Right? And how do we get that into place? Because at the end of the day, it works for them, right? So that's important for me. Yeah.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to throw it open to the audience now, and I'm going to display another one of my biases. I'm from regional Queensland, so I'm going to start with regional Queensland. Priscilla, do we have any questions at the moment from around the state? One, actually. Sure. We'll wait for the microphone. Is it 40 words or less? Okay.
All right, so it's actually from John, and he's from the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services, and he's asked to the whole panel, what do you see as the role of the Charter in helping Queenslanders being more resilient in the face of human and natural disasters?
I might throw to Ian on that one, given that that's part of your portfolio, Ian.
Okay, where do you start with that one? Again, I think this is about the whole community working together. We know that we survive some of the natural disasters that we have best because as a community it really unites us. It gives us a common foe almost to deal with. If we start segmenting parts of the community based on their perceptions and misunderstandings of what they're facing, or that they're left out of the conversation about, well, how do you prepare, how do you deal with it during, and how do you deal with the recovery? I think we've got a long way to go in that space, but I truly believe that the Charter gives us a very clear direction. We work together to deal with these sorts of things, these sorts of crises, and it will make us stronger and better. It will also, with everyone doing their piece, it means that particularly emergency services during that response and recovery phase in particular won't be diverted looking after particular segments of the community who are quite capable of looking after themselves, as long as they're involved in the discussion, as long as they're involved in understanding what their part is in playing. So it's a really good question, and it's certainly one that opens up all of those other issues of where's the outreach? So you don't, as they say, you don't start making friends when the first fire is shot in anger. You've actually got to work very, very hard on those relationships way before that ever happens. So we've got to engage all of the community. We've got to explain what happens and how we respond to these sorts of things. That way we make the whole society more resilient.
Thanks,
Can I
Ian.
just jump in very quickly?
Yes,
And I do read your charter, so I memorize it for exams anyway. So I know 578. I mean, it talks very clearly about fostering, safer, caring, inclusive community. Basic principles. Whatever service deliver, that's what you want to do.
Thanks to the two commissioners, and thanks to John from QFES. Question from the floor. Right at the front, Peter.
My question is for the Commissioner and also...
Sorry, we'll just wait for the microphone, Peter. And if you could just state, I know, we do know who you are, but some people at the back may not know who's asking the question. So.
My name's Peter Russo, I'm the State Member for Toohey. I have a question for the Commissioner, Ian Stewart, and Catherine Forrester from Queensland Health. It's probably a double barrel, but one of the things that was spoken about, and Commissioner Tan mentioned it, is in relation to employment. A lot of people, if we go back to the days when the Vietnamese refugees came here, there was programs for some of the medical doctors. I know Queensland Uni and then some of the profession embraced them and assisted them to upgrade their qualifications so that they could gainful employment. It doesn't, from where I sit, there seems to be a real gap in the people that are coming from as refugees now who do have qualifications, being able to integrate back into the workforce, and there doesn't seem to be any workable programs to assist them to either upgrade their qualifications or to find employment within the police and within Queensland Health.
So the critical issue is around employment. That is a critical issue. Kathleen, would you like to open up the comments there?
Sure. So I know that our workforce strategies do identify the fact that we have a commitment to assisting people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds coming into health. One of the challenges is having qualifications that have been obtained overseas, recognised here in Australia. So again, that's an issue that's been raised in discussion with me just in the last few months around what is it that we can do to assist people who come from overseas with qualifications and experience in the health sector move more readily into the health sector now. So that's a live discussion. The other sort of area of work that we see, again, in terms of local initiatives, are some of our local HHSs who do run familiarisation and engagement programs with local communities and people who are migrants to the country, to familiarise them with our health service and our health system. And so we've seen some quite small but nice examples of health engaging with local communities, and through a familiarisation program helped a number of people get onto an employment pathway into health. So I appreciate it's a very big system, and there are probably lots of small initiatives like that, but at that big system level there are conversations happening now because it is an issue that's been raised with us.
Thanks, Kathleen. I might actually skip Commissioner Stewart, just because I know that you did talk about the Carl Recruit program and what you saw as the big opportunity in terms of moving people through various levels of the organisation. I'm just conscious, Sara, of the mentoring program that Suncorp is doing, and I'm just wondering if that relates to the question that Peter asked.
Yeah, it does, because I think one of the challenges that faces people who recently arrived to Australia is just not being networked in. Yeah. And so one of the things that we're hoping that career mentoring and the job readiness program will be able to do is to create those connections and help people to network in. So as a career mentor, a Suncorp person would be matched up with someone in the same kind of background, and then they would do things like take them along to industry association events, that they would never have any access to, and then that way they can learn about which companies are actually working and who are the clients in that industry and how do they apply, and get introductions and that kind of thing. So I think sometimes the really practical networking, you actually mentioned about bringing people into the fraternity. That's kind of what we want to do. But then it's also about things like your CV and how it's presented, and your interview skills, and really practical things like that can make a huge difference.
Peter, very quickly, this is an important criteria in terms of, apart from qualifications, it's just that I mean, I was a lawyer before. I mean, you could be, 40-year-old experienced lawyer from Singapore, intellectual property, you come here and apply for a job, no local experience, okay, qualified or anything. Well, you are. You get high skills, and the question, how do we fit it in? And looking outside the box. I was at a forum recently like this, and there's a lady who asked a question, and she's from Jamaica, and she said, is there a policy in Australia that says when I apply for a job, they won't take international reference? I said, no. And she's getting there. I said, well, this is not something that I do every day, but I said, look, you and I are going to have coffee at least 3 sessions, all right? We'll have a talk, and I'm going to know you better. When the time I know you better and I think you're okay, I'm going to give you a reference. I mean, but it should be. I mean, it should be, but the fact that they want a local reference, if I think I know her, and after, 3 sessions of coffee, I think she's, someone that has got credentials, and she looked highly qualified, but she can get a job. They want to give me an interview, right? And so how to question, corporate government bodies, how do we break that? Go beyond. That's important. Yeah.
I think, Peter, also, if I could just say, and in relation to this question, and it's a good question, and I think one of the issues that we constantly are looking at is the unconscious bias that sits inside some of our recruiting structures and frameworks, that we've got to be so careful that we're not putting up structural barriers to people from any culture being able to apply if they want to. It's one thing to attract them to your organisation, and we aim to be an employer of choice for all Queenslanders. But you've got to be careful that how you structure those recruitment processes don't actually put up hidden barriers, and that's a really important point. So thank you, you're right.
Thanks, Ian. We've probably got time for one more question. Lady down the middle.
Thank you. My name is Chito Boama. I represent the Queensland African Communities Council. I would just like to start by thanking Commissioner Tan for everything you've said. It rings truth here today for somebody who's a multicultural Australian living in Australia. When it comes to unemployment, there's so many issues that I receive as a person representing Africans in Queensland. And the unconscious bias, the racism is rampant, and there is not enough conversation going on about it. Just this week on Monday, I had to speak up in my office because one of the managers used a very derogatory term in reference to a South African woman he met in Chinchilla. He used the N-word. I had to step up to one of my colleagues and said, did I hear him right or was that wrong? And she said, oh, that's just the way he is. So you can imagine the struggle that we face every day as people of color. And just a week ago, a friend of mine sent me an ad for a job, or an NDIS participant wants a disability support carer. But in that job specifically says, I do not want a person of color in my house. Now, you know that in that industry, lots of people from multicultural communities do that course in aged care or disability support. What does that mean for them in terms of employment?
I might throw, because I think there's a big issue there. There's not a lot of issues, but I think if I can draw on, say, what's hit the news recently in South Australia, where a recruitment company who recruits to a large ticketing agency, a supervisor instructed a worker not to sell any more tickets to Aboriginal people. So that's hit the news recently, and the commission down there was unable to progress it because there was no complainant, direct complainant. It was third parties. So, Commissioner, I'm just wondering, sometimes there's critiques quite often there's critiques of legislation and charters that they don't have enough teeth.
Yeah.
So,
it's a difficult issue, to be fair. I mean, we're talking about a social problem as well, and the divide between the legal and I'm grappling with this even in my role about where I've got the powers or don't, and even police, the question of hate crime, where does it cross to a point of crime? The police aren't doing the work of community in policing bigots, and it's not their role either. So there's always a line there. And these are the things, but it's up to individuals obviously taking those points up and then challenging it. And this is where it's critical to do that. But it's that leadership as well, obviously. But I mean, apart from the fact we can talk about this and go to our website and tell you about how to, initiate any complaints you might have and whole issues about how to address those issues. But it's that leadership I'm talking about. And I'll give you an example recently. The South Sudanese community are big into basketball, and they have a national game that they play in Victoria every year down in Dandenongs. And last year they experienced problem getting a venue because no one wanted to give them a venue because they're known to be difficult and they erect the players and the violence attracted to that, so they said no. And they didn't play a game. For me, I've not been critical of Victoria or anyone else, but it's just the things that we don't think through. And I said, where was the leadership? Why didn't leaders came together? Why didn't government or even through the police said, we will underwrite that game. We will be there and we will say, give them a venue and we will do that. But it didn't happen. And so all the money is pumped in and doing all the wonderful stuff there, where it's important for the community that wanted to play basketball, and we taught them to do that because it's good for them and they're into sports and not in the street doing silly things. They did that. They came together as a national group to play basketball and they loved the game. They were disappointed, and they're disappointed, they felt let down. And this community is saying, what's the price we pay when we say we do this and we don't do it in a way that's practical? All it took was that leadership was saying, no, we will give them a game, or we'll give them a venue. And they went somewhere else to play, and nothing violent happened. The question is, these are things you need to focus on, not just a wonderful plan that's laid out. It's the things that aren't in your plan, or it should be in your plan, where it's, well, hang on, when these things happen, this is what we will do. As a government, as an agency, and we'll support them. If we can't do it ourselves, we'll get somebody else to do that, and they will have the game because we intend to make sure they have a game. And these are the practical aspects. And does it matter? It mattered for them. It mattered for them in the trust of government about the things we talked about that we said we would do, and the money we pumped into all the wonderful programs. But where it counted, they felt it wasn't there. Right? And so these are important elements of why it's important to think outside.
Thank you. I'm mindful of the time. I am also mindful that we gave you an extra 5 minutes to have another Eritrean donut. So I just wanted to check, Priscilla, was there any other questions from the region? Fine. Look, we might just close this part of the conversation. And I say this part of the conversation, I think that I'm pretty confident that if I'd allowed more questions to occur and if I didn't ask so many, that it would have, the conversation would have continued for some time longer. So can I encourage those conversations to continue? I think we started them in this forum 2 speaker series ago. This is the 3rd series. I'm sure we're looking forward to the next one. Can I take this opportunity to ask you to thank all of our speakers today, including the Minister, the Commissioner, Kathleen, Commissioner Stewart and Sara, for gracing us with their presence and their wisdom today.